The Channel Tunnel, French, Le Tunnel sous la Manche, also nicknamed the Channel, is a 50.45 km, 31.35 miles, rail tunnel linking Folkestone, Kent, in England, with Coquelles, Pas-de-Calais, near Calais in northern France, beneath the English Channel at the Strait of Dover. It is the only fixed link between the island of Great Britain and the European mainland. At its lowest point, it is 75 meters, 250 feet, deep below the seabed and 115 meters, 380 feet, below sea level. At 37.9 kilometers, 23.5 miles, the tunnel has the longest underwater section of any tunnel in the world. The Seaiton Tunnel in Japan is both longer overall at 53.85 kilometers, 33.46 miles, and deeper at 240 meters, 790 feet, below sea level. The speed limit for trains through the tunnel is 160 kilometers per hour, 99 miles per hour. The tunnel carries high-speed Eurostar passenger trains, the Eurotunnel shuttle for road vehicles, the largest such transport in the world, and international goods trains. The tunnel connects end to end with the LGV Nord and High-Speed 1 high-speed railway lines. In 2017, through rail services carried 10.3 million passengers and 1.22 m tons of freight, and the shuttle carried 10.4 m passengers, 2.6 m cars, 51,000 coaches, and 1.6 m lorries, equivalent to 21.3 m tons of freight. This compares with 11.7 million passengers, 2.6 million lorries and 2.2 million cars through the port of Dover. Plans for a cross-channel fixed link appeared as early as 1802, but British political and press pressure over the compromising of national security had disrupted attempts to build a tunnel. An early attempt at building a channel tunnel was made in the late 19th century, on the English side, in the hope of forcing the hand of the English government. The eventual successful project, organized by Eurotunnel, began construction in 1988 and opened in 1994. At £5.5 billion, 1985 prices, it was at the time the most expensive construction project ever proposed. The cost finally amounted to £9 billion, $21 billion, well over its predicted budget. Since its construction, the tunnel has experienced a few mechanical problems. Both fires and cold weather have temporarily disrupted its operation. People have been attempting to use the tunnel to illegally travel to the UK since at least 1997, creating the ongoing issue of the migrants around Calais on the French side, causing both diplomatic disagreement and violence. Origins. Earlier proposals. In 1802, Albert Mathieu Favre, a French mining engineer, put forward a proposal to tunnel under the English Channel, with illumination from oil lamps, horse-drawn coaches, and an artificial island positioned mid-channel for changing horses. Mathieu Favre's design envisaged a bored two-level tunnel with the top tunnel used for transport and the bottom one for groundwater flows. In 1839, Aimé Tholme-de-Gamond, a Frenchman, performed the first geological and hydrographical surveys on the channel, between Calais and Dover. Tholme-de-Gamond explored several schemes and, in 1856, he presented a proposal to Napoleon III for a mine railway tunnel from Cap Grenade to East Water Point with a port, air shaft on the Varne sandbank at a cost of 170 million francs, or less than £7 million. In 1865, a deputation led by George Ward Hunt proposed the idea of a tunnel to the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the day, William Ewart Gladstone. Around 1866, William Lowe and Sir John Hawkshaw promoted ideas, but apart from preliminary geological studies none were implemented. An official Anglo-French protocol was established in 1876 for a cross-channel railway tunnel. In 1881, the British railway entrepreneurs Sir Edward Watkin and Alexander Laveley, a French Suez Canal contractor, were in the Anglo-French Submarine Railway Company that conducted exploratory work on both sides of the channel. On the English side, a 2.13 meter, 7 feet, diameter Beaumont English boring machine dug a 1,893 meter, 6,211 feet, pilot tunnel from Shakespeare Cliff. On the French side, A similar machine dug 1,669 meters, 5,476 feet, from Sangatte. The project was abandoned in May 1882, owing to British political and press campaigns asserting that a tunnel would compromise Britain's national defences. These early works were encountered more than a century later during the TML project. A 1907 film, Tunnelling the English Channel by pioneer filmmaker George Ismail Yes, depicts King Edward VII and President Armand Vallières dreaming of building a tunnel under the English Channel. In 1919, during the Paris Peace Conference, the British Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, repeatedly brought up the idea of a Channel tunnel as a way of reassuring France about British willingness to defend against another German attack. The French did not take the idea seriously, and nothing came of Lloyd George's proposal. In the 1920s, Winston Churchill had advocated for the Channel Tunnel, using that exact name in an essay entitled "Should Strategists Veto the Tunnel?" The essay was published on July 27, 1924 in the Weekly Dispatch, and argued vehemently against the idea that the tunnel could be used by a continental enemy in an invasion of Britain. Churchill expressed his enthusiasm for the project again in an article for the Daily Mail on February 12, 1936, "Why Not a Channel Tunnel?" There was another proposal in 1929, but nothing came of this discussion and the idea was shelved. Proponents estimated the construction cost at $150 million. The engineers had addressed the concerns of both nations' military leaders by designing two sumps, one near the coast of each country that could be flooded at will to block the tunnel. But this did not appease military leaders, and other concerns about hordes of tourists who would disrupt English life. Military fears continued during the Second World War. After the fall of France, as Britain prepared for an expected German invasion, a Royal Navy officer in the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development calculated that Hitler could use slave labor to build 2 Channel tunnels in 18 months. The estimate caused rumors that Germany had already begun digging. A British film from Gaumont Studios, The Tunnel, also called Transatlantic Tunnel, was released in 1935 as a futuristic science fiction project concerning the creation of a transatlantic tunnel. It referred briefly to its protagonist, a Mr. McCallan, as having completed a British Channel tunnel successfully in 1940, 5 years into the future of the film's release. By 1955, defense arguments had become less relevant due to the dominance of air power, and both the British and French governments supported technical and geological surveys. In 1958 the 1881 workings were cleared in preparation for a £100,000 geological survey by the Channel Tunnel Study Group. 30% of the funding came from the Channel Tunnel Co Limited, the largest shareholder of which was the British Transport Commission, a successor to the South Eastern Railway. A detailed geological survey was carried out in 1964 and 1965. Although the two countries agreed to build a tunnel in 1964, the Phase 1 initial studies and signing of a second agreement to cover Phase 2 took until 1973. Construction work of this government-funded project to create 2 tunnels designed to accommodate car shuttle wagons on either side of a service tunnel started on both sides of the channel in 1974. On January 20, 1975, to the dismay of their French partners, the now governing Labour Party in Britain cancelled the project due to uncertainty about TEC membership, doubling cost estimates and the general economic crisis at the time. By this time the British tunnel boring machine was ready and the Ministry of Transport was able to do a 300 meters, 980 feet, experimental drive. This short tunnel was reused as the starting and access point for tunneling operations from the British side. The cancellation costs were estimated to be £17 million. On the French side, a tunnel boring machine had been installed underground in a stub tunnel. It lay there for 14 years until 1988, when it was sold, dismantled, refurbished and shipped to Turkey, where it was used to drive the Moda tunnel for the Istanbul sewerage scheme, designed and supervised by British civil engineers Binney and Partners, and officially opened by Margaret Thatcher in 1989. Initiation of project. In 1979, the Mousehole project was suggested when the Conservatives came to power in Britain. The concept was a single-track rail tunnel with a service tunnel, but without shuttle terminals. The British government took no interest in funding the project, but the British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher did not object to a privately funded project, although she said she assumed it would be for cars rather than trains. In 1981, Thatcher and the French President François Mitterrand agreed to establish a working group to evaluate a privately funded project. In June 1982, the Franco-British study group favored a twin tunnel to accommodate conventional trains and a vehicle shuttle service. In April 1985, promoters were invited to submit scheme proposals. 4 submissions were shortlisted. Channel Tunnel, a rail proposal based on the 1975 scheme presented by Channel Tunnel Group / France Manche, CTG/FM. Eurobridge, a 35 kilometers, 22 miles, suspension bridge with a series of 5 kilometers, 3.1 miles, spans with a roadway in an enclosed tube. Euroroute, a 21 kilometers, 13 miles, tunnel between artificial islands approached by bridges. Channel Expressway, a large diameter road tunnels with mid-channel ventilation towers. The cross-channel ferry industry protested under the name FlexiLink. In 1975 there was no campaign protesting against a fixed link, with one of the largest ferry operators, SeaLink, being state-owned. FlexiLink continued rousing opposition throughout 1986 and 1987. Public opinion strongly favored a drive-through tunnel, but concerns about ventilation, accident management and driver mesmerization led to the only shortlisted rail submission, CTG, FM, being awarded the project in January 1986. Reasons given for the selection included that it caused least disruption to shipping in the channel, least environmental disruption, was the best protected against terrorism, and was the most likely to attract sufficient private finance. Arrangement. The British Channel Tunnel Group consisted of 2 banks and 5 construction companies, while their French counterparts, France Manche, consisted of 3 banks and 5 construction companies. The role of the banks was to advise on financing and secure loan commitments. On July 2, 1985, the groups formed Channel Tunnel Group / France Manche, CTG/FM. Their submission to the British and French governments was drawn from the 1975 project, including 11 volumes and a substantial environmental impact statement. The design and construction was done by the 10 construction companies in the CTG/FM group. The French terminal and boring from Sangat was done by the 5 French construction companies in the joint venture group Guy Transmanche Construction. The English terminal and boring from Shakespeare Cliff was done by the 5 British construction companies in the Translink joint venture. The 2 partnerships were linked by a binational project organization called Transmanche Link, TML. The Maître d'œuvre was a supervisory engineering body employed by Eurotunnel under the terms of the concession that monitored the project and reported to the governments and banks. In France, with its long tradition of infrastructure investment, the project had widespread approval. The French National Assembly approved it unanimously in April 1987, and after a public inquiry, the Senate approved it unanimously in June. In Britain, select committees examined the proposal, making history by holding hearings away from Westminster, in Kent. In February 1987, the third reading of the Channel Tunnel Bill took place in the House of Commons, and passed by 94 votes to 22. The Channel Tunnel Act gained royal assent and passed into law in July. Parliamentary support for the project came partly from provincial members of parliament on the basis of promises of regional Eurostar through train services that never materialized. The promises were repeated in 1996 when the contract for construction of the Channel Tunnel rail link was awarded. The tunnel is a build-own-operate-transfer (BOOT) project with the concession. TML would design and build the tunnel, but financing was through a separate legal entity, Eurotunnel. Eurotunnel absorbed CTG, FM and signed a construction contract with TML, but the British and French governments controlled final engineering and safety decisions, now in the hands of the Channel Tunnel Safety Authority. The British and French governments gave Eurotunnel a 55-year operating concession, from 1987, extended by 10 years to 65 years in 1993, to repay loans and pay dividends. A railway usage agreement was signed between Eurotunnel, British Rail and SNCF guaranteeing future revenue in exchange for the railways obtaining half of the tunnel's capacity. Private funding for such a complex infrastructure project was of unprecedented scale. An initial equity of £45 million was raised by CDG, FM, increased by £206 million private institutional placement, £770 million was raised in a public share offer that included press and television advertisements, a syndicated bank loan and letter of credit arranged £5 billion. Privately financed, the total investment costs at 1985 prices were £2.6 billion. At the 1994 completion actual costs were, in 1985 prices, £4.65 billion, an 80% cost overrun. The cost overrun was partly due to enhanced safety, security, and environmental demands. Financing costs were 140% higher than forecast. Construction. Working from both the English side and the French side of the channel, 11 tunnel boring machines or TBMs cut through chalk marl to construct 2 rail tunnels and a service tunnel. The vehicle shuttle terminals are at Tridon, part of Folkestone, and Coquelles, and are connected to the English M20 and French A16 motorways respectively. Tunneling commenced in 1988, and the tunnel began operating in 1994. In 1985 prices, the total construction cost was £4.65 billion, equivalent to £13 billion in 2015, an 80% cost overrun. At the peak of construction 15,000 people were employed with daily expenditure over £3 million. 10 workers, 8 of them British, were killed during construction between 1987 and 1993, most in the first few months of boring. Completion. A 2-inch, 50mm, diameter pilot hole allowed the service tunnel to break through without ceremony on October 30, 1990. On December 1, 1990, Englishman Graham Fagg and Frenchman Philip Cosette broke through the service tunnel with the media watching. Eurotunnel completed the tunnel on time. A BBC TV television commentator called Graham Fagg the first man to cross the channel by land for 8,000 years. The tunnel was officially opened, 1 year later than originally planned, by Queen Elizabeth II and the French President, François Mitterrand, in a ceremony held in Calais on May 6, 1994. The Queen travelled through the tunnel to Calais on a Eurostar train, which stopped nose to nose with the train that carried President Mitterrand from Paris. Following the ceremony, President Mitterrand and the Queen travelled on the shuttle to a similar ceremony in Folkestone. A full public service did not start for several months. The first freight train, however, ran on June 1, 1994 and carried Rover and many cars being exported to Italy. The Channel Tunnel Rail Link, Control, now called High Speed 1, runs 69 miles, 111 kilometers, from St Pancras railway station in London to the tunnel portal at Folkestone in Kent. It cost £5.8 billion. On September 16, 2003, the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, opened the first section of High Speed 1, from Folkestone to North Kent. On November 6, 2007, the Queen officially opened High Speed 1 in St Pancras International Station, replacing the original slower link to Waterloo International Railway Station. High Speed 1 trains travel at up to 300 km per hour, 186 miles per hour, the journey from London to Paris taking 2 hours 15 minutes, to Brussels 1 hour 51 minutes. In 1994, the American Society of Civil Engineers elected the tunnel as one of the 7 modern wonders of the world. In 1995, the American magazine Popular Mechanics published the results. Opening dates. Opening was phased for various services offered as the Channel Tunnel Safety Authority, the IGC, gave permission for various services to begin at several dates over the period 1994-1995, but start-up dates were a few days later. Engineering. Surveying undertaken in the 20 years before construction confirmed earlier speculations that a tunnel could be bored through a chalk marl stratum. The chalk marl is conducive to tunneling, with impermeability, ease of excavation and strength. The chalk marl runs along the entire length of the English side of the tunnel, but on the French side a length of 5 kilometers, 3 miles, has variable and difficult geology. The tunnel consists of 3 bores, two 7.6 meter, 25 feet, diameter rail tunnels, 30 meters, 98 feet, apart, 50 kilometers, 31 miles, in length with a 4.8 meter, 16 feet, diameter service tunnel in between. The 3 bores are connected by cross passages and piston relief ducts. The service tunnel was used as a pilot tunnel, boring ahead of the main tunnels to determine the conditions. English access was provided at Shakespeare Cliff, French access from a shaft at Sangat. The French side used 5 tunnel boring machines, TBMs, the English side 6. The service tunnel uses Service Tunnel Transport System, STTS, and light service tunnel vehicles, LADOGs. Fire safety was a critical design issue. Between the portals at Busing and Castle Hill the tunnel is 50.5 kilometers, 31 miles, long, with 3.3 kilometers, 2 miles, underland on the French side and 9.3 kilometers, 6 miles, on the UK side, and 37.9 kilometers, 24 miles, undersea. It is the 3rd longest trail tunnel in the world, behind the Gotthard Base Tunnel in Switzerland and the Seiden Tunnel in Japan, but with the longest undersea section. The average depth is 45 meters, 148 feet, below the seabed. On the UK side, of the expected 5 million cubic meters, 6.5 times 106 cubic yards, of spoil approximately 1 million cubic meters, 1.3 times 106 cubic yards, was used for fill at the terminal site, and the remainder was deposited at Lower Shakespeare Cliff behind a seawall, reclaiming 74 acres, 30 hectares, of land. This land was then made into the Samphire Hoe Country Park. Environmental impact assessment did not identify any major risks for the project, and further studies into safety, noise, and air pollution were overall positive. However, environmental objections were raised over a high-speed link to London. Geology. Successful tunneling required a sound understanding of the topography and geology and the selection of the best rock strata through which to dig. The geology of this side generally consists of northeasterly dipping Cretaceous strata, part of the northern limb of the Wealden-Bulena ice dome. Characteristics include continuous chalk on the cliffs on either side of the channel containing no major faulting, as observed by Verstegen in 1605. 4 geological strata, marine sediments laid down 9,100 million years ago, pervious upper and middle chalk above slightly pervious lower chalk and finally impermeable gault clay. A sandy stratum, glauconitic marl, Torsia, is in between the chalk marl and gault clay. A 25-30 meter, 80 to 98 foot, layer of chalk marl, French, crayey blue, in the lower third of the lower chalk appeared to present the best tunneling medium. The chalk has a clay content of 30–40% providing impermeability to groundwater yet relatively easy excavation with strength allowing minimal support. Ideally the tunnel would be bored in the bottom 15 meters, 49 feet, of the chalk marl, allowing water inflow from fractures and joints to be minimized, but above the gault clay that would increase stress on the tunnel lining and swell and soften when wet. On the English side, the stratum dip is less than 5 degrees. On the French side this increases to 20 degrees. Jointing and faulting are present on both sides. On the English side, only minor faults of displacement less than 2 meters, 7 feet, exist. On the French side, displacements of up to 15 meters, 49 feet, are present owing to the Kinnock's anticlinal fold. The faults are of limited width, filled with calcite, pyrite and remolded clay. The increased dip and faulting restricted the selection of route on the French side. To avoid confusion, microfossil assemblages were used to classify the chalk marl. On the French side, particularly near the coast, the chalk was harder, more brittle and more fractured than on the English side. This led to the adoption of different tunneling techniques on the two sides. The Quaternary Untersee Valley Fossangered, and Castle Hill landslip at the English portal, caused concerns. Identified by the 1964–65 Geophysical Survey, the Fossangered is an infilled valley system extending 80 meters, 262 feet, below the seabed, 500 meters, 1,640 feet, south of the tunnel route in mid-channel. A 1986 survey shows that a tributary crossed the path of the tunnel, and so the tunnel route was made as far north and deep as possible. The English terminal had to be located in the Castle Hill landslip, which consists of displaced and tipping blocks of lower chalk, glauconitic marl and gault debris. Thus the area was stabilized by buttressing and inserting drainage adits. The service tunnel acted as a pilot preceding the main ones, so that the geology, areas of crushed rock, and zones of high water inflow could be predicted. Exploratory probing took place in the service tunnel, in the form of extensive forward probing, vertical downward probes and sideways probing. Surveying. Marine soundings and samplings by Thomda Gammon were carried out during 1833-67, establishing the seabed depth at a maximum of 55 meters, 180 feet, and the continuity of geological strata, layers. Surveying continued over many years, with 166 marine and 70 land-deep boreholes being drilled and over 4,009 kilometers of marine geophysical survey completed. Surveys were undertaken in 1958-1959, 1964-1965, 1972-1974 and 1986-1988. The surveying in 1958-59 catered for immersed tube and bridge designs as well as a bored tunnel, and thus a wide area was investigated. At this time, marine geophysics surveying for engineering projects was in its infancy, with poor positioning and resolution from seismic profiling. The 1964-65 surveys concentrated on a northerly route that left the English coast at Dover Harbour, using 70 boreholes. An area of deeply weathered rock with high permeability was located just south of Dover Harbour. Given the previous survey results and access constraints, a more southerly route was investigated in the 1972-73 survey, and the route was confirmed to be feasible. Information for the tunneling project also came from work before the 1975 cancellation. On the French side at Sangat, a deep shaft with adits was made. On the English side at Shakespeare Cliff, the government allowed 250 meters, 820 feet, of 4.5 meter, 15 feet, diameter tunnel to be driven. The actual tunnel alignment, method of excavation and support were essentially the same as the 1975 attempt. In the 1986-87 survey, previous findings were reinforced, and the characteristics of the gault clay and the tunneling medium, chalk marl that made up 85% of the route, were investigated. Geophysical techniques from the oil industry were employed. Tunneling. Tunneling was a major engineering challenge, with the only precedent being the Untersee Seitan Tunnel in Japan, which opened in 1988. A serious risk with underwater tunnels is major water inflow due to the pressure from the sea above, under weak ground conditions. The tunnel also had the challenge of time. Being privately funded, early financial return was paramount. The objective was to construct two 7.6-meter diameter, 25 feet, rail tunnels, 30 meters, 98 feet, apart, 50 kilometers, 31 miles, in length, a 4.8-meter diameter, 16 feet, service tunnel between the two main ones, pairs of 3.3-meter diameter, 11 feet, cross passages linking the rail tunnels to the service one at 375 meter, 1,230 feet, spacing, piston relief ducts 2 meters, 7 feet, in diameter connecting the rail tunnels 250 meters, 820 feet, apart, 2 undersea crossover caverns to connect the rail tunnels, with the service tunnel always preceding the main ones by at least 1 kilometer, 0.6 miles, to ascertain the ground conditions. There was plenty of experience with excavating through chalk in the mining industry, while the undersea crossover caverns were a complex engineering problem. The French one was based on the Mount Baker Ridge Freeway Tunnel in Seattle. The UK cavern was dug from the service tunnel ahead of the main ones, to avoid delay. Precast segmental linings and the main TBM drives were used, but two different solutions were used. On the French side, neoprene and grout-sealed bolted linings made of cast iron or high-strength reinforced concrete were used, On the English side, the main requirement was for speed, so bolting of cast iron lining segments was only carried out in areas of poor geology. In the UK rail tunnels, 8 lining segments plus a key segment were used. In the French side, 5 segments plus a key. On the French side, a 55 meter, 180 feet, diameter 75 meter, 246 feet, deep grout curtained shaft at St. Gat was used for access. On the English side, a marshalling area was 140 meters, 459 feet, below the top of Shakespeare Cliff. The new Austrian tunneling method, NATM, was first applied in the chalk marl here. On the English side, the land tunnels were driven from Shakespeare Cliff, same place as the marine tunnels, not from Folkestone. The platform at the base of the cliff was not large enough for all of the drives, and, despite environmental objections, tunnel spoil was placed behind a reinforced concrete seawall, on condition of placing the chalk in an enclosed lagoon, to avoid wide dispersal of chalk fines. Owing to limited space, the precast lining factory was on the Isle of Grain in the Thames estuary, which used Scottish granite aggregate delivered by ship from the Foster Yeoman Coastal Superquarry at Glinsda in Loch Linnhe on the west coast of Scotland. On the French side, owing to the greater permeability to water, earth pressure balance TBMs with open and closed modes were used. The TBMs were of a closed nature during the initial 5 kilometers, 3 miles, but then operated as open, boring through the chalk marl stratum. This minimized the impact to the ground, allowed high water pressures to be withstood, and it also alleviated the need to grout ahead of the tunnel. The French effort required 5 TBMs, 2 main marine machines, 1 mainland machine. The shortland drives of 3 kilometers, 2 miles, allowed 1 TBM to complete the first drive, then reverse direction and complete the other, and 2 service tunnel machines. On the English side, the simpler geology allowed faster open-face TBMs. 6 machines were used, all commenced digging from Shakespeare Cliff, 3 marine-bound and 3 for the land tunnels. Towards the completion of the undersea drives, the UK TBMs were driven steeply downwards and buried clear of the tunnel. These buried TBMs were then used to provide an electrical earth. The French TBMs then completed the tunnel and were dismantled. A 900 mm, 35 in, gauge railway was used on the English side during construction. In contrast to the English machines, which were given alphanumeric names, the French tunneling machines were all named after women: Brigitte, Europa, Catherine, Virginie, Pascaline, Severin. At the end of the tunneling, 1 machine was on display at the side of the M20 motorway in Folkestone until Eurotunnel sold it on eBay for £39,999 to a scrap metal merchant. Another machine, T4 Virginie, still survives on the French side, adjacent to Junction 41 on the A16, in the middle of the D243E3/D243E4 roundabout. On it are the words Hommage aux bâtisseurs du tunnel, meaning tribute to the builders of the tunnel. TBM design. The 11 TBMs were designed and manufactured through a joint venture between Robbins Company of Kent, Markham and Company, and Kawasaki Heavy Industries. Railway design. Loading gauge. The loading gauge height is 5.75 meters, 18 feet 10 in. Communications. There are 3 communication systems: concession radio, CR, for mobile vehicles and personnel within Eurotunnel's concession, terminals, tunnels, coastal shafts, track-to-train radio, TTR, for secure speech and data between trains and the railway control center, shuttle internal radio, SIR, for communication between shuttle crew and to passengers over car radios. This service was discontinued within 1 year of opening because of drivers' difficulty setting their radios to the correct frequency, 88.8 MHz. Power supply. Power is delivered to the locomotives via an overhead line, catenary, at 25 kV 50 Hz. With a normal overhead clearance of 6.3 meters, 20 feet 8 in. All tunnel services run on electricity, shared equally from English and French sources. There are 2 substations fed at 400 kV at each terminal, but in an emergency the tunnel's lighting, about 20,000 light fittings, and plant can be powered solely from either England or France. The traditional railway south of London uses a 750 VDC third rail to deliver electricity, but since the opening of High Speed 1 there is no longer any need for tunnel trains to use the third rail system. High Speed 1, the tunnel and the LGV Nord all have power provided via overhead catenary at 25 kV 50 Hz. The railways on classic lines in Belgium are also electrified by overhead wires, but at 3000 VDC. Signaling. A cab signaling system gives information directly to train drivers on a display. There is a train protection system that stops the train if the speed exceeds that indicated on the in-cab display. TVM 430, as used on LGV Nord and High Speed 1, is used in the tunnel. The TVM signaling is interconnected with the signaling on the high-speed lines either side, allowing trains to enter and exit the tunnel system without stopping. The maximum speed is 160 km per hour. Signaling in the tunnel is coordinated from two control centers, the main control center at the Folkestone terminal, and a backup at the Calais terminal, which is staffed at all times and can take over all operations in the event of a breakdown or emergency. Track system. Conventional ballasted tunnel track was ruled out owing to the difficulty of maintenance and lack of stability and precision. The Sonneville International Corporation's track system was chosen based on reliability and cost-effectiveness based on good performance in Swiss tunnels and worldwide. The type of track used is known as low vibration track, LVT. Like ballasted track, the LVT is of the free-floating type, held in place by gravity and friction. Reinforced concrete blocks of 100 kg support the rails every 60 cm and are held by 12 mm thick closed-cell polymer foam pads placed at the bottom of rubber boots. The latter separate the block's mass movements from the lean encasement concrete. Ballastless track provides extra overhead clearance necessary for the passage of larger trains. The corrugated rubber walls of the boots add a degree of isolation of horizontal wheel rail vibrations, and are insulators of the track signal circuit in the humid tunnel environment. X60, 60 kg/m, rails of 900A grade rest on 6 mm, 0.2 in, rail pads, which fit the RN, Sonneville bolted dual leaf springs. The rails, LVT blocks and their boots with pads were assembled outside the tunnel, in a fully automated process developed by the LVT inventor, Mr. Roger Sonneville. About 334,000 Sonneville blocks were made on the Sangat site. Maintenance activities are less than projected. Initially the rails were ground on a yearly basis or after approximately 100 mgt of traffic. Ride quality continues to be noticeably smooth and of low noise. Maintenance is facilitated by the existence of two tunnel junctions or crossover facilities, allowing for two-way operation in each of the 6 tunnel segments thereby created, and thus providing safe access for maintenance of one isolated tunnel segment at a time. The two crossovers are the largest artificial undersea caverns ever built, 150 meters long, 10 meters high and 18 meters wide. The English crossover is 8 kilometers, 5 miles, from Shakespeare Cliff, and the French crossover is 12 kilometers, 7 miles, from Sangat. Ventilation, cooling and drainage. The ventilation system maintains the air pressure in the service tunnel higher than in the rail tunnels, so that in the event of a fire, smoke does not enter the service tunnel from the rail tunnels. 2 cooling water pipes in each rail tunnel circulate chilled water to remove heat generated by the rail traffic. Pumping stations remove water in the tunnels from rain, seepage, and so on. Rolling stock. Eurotunnel shuttle. Initially 38 shuttle locomotives were commissioned, with one at each end of a shuttle train. The shuttles have 2 separate halves, single and double deck. Each half has 2 loading, unloading wagons and 12 carrier wagons. Eurotunnel's original order was for 9 tourist shuttles. Heavy goods vehicle, HGV. Shuttles also have 2 halves, with each half containing 1 loading wagon, 1 unloading wagon and 14 carrier wagons. There is a club car behind the leading locomotive. Eurotunnel originally ordered 6 HGV shuttle rakes. Freight locomotives. 46 Class 92 locomotives for hauling freight trains and overnight passenger trains. The Night Star project, which was abandoned, were commissioned, running on both overhead AC and third rail DC power. However, RFF does not let these run on French railways, so there are plans to certify Alstom Prima 2 locomotives for use in the tunnel. International passenger 31 Eurostar trains, based on the French DGV, built to UK loading gauge with many modifications for safety within the tunnel, were commissioned, with ownership split between British Rail, French National Railways, SNCF, and Belgian National Railways, SNCB. British Rail ordered 7 more for services north of London. Around 2010, Eurostar ordered 10 trains from Siemens based on its Velero product. Germany, DB, has since around 2005 tried to get permission to run train services to London. At the end of 2009, extensive fireproofing requirements were dropped and DB received permission to run German Intercity Express, ICE, test trains through the tunnel. In June 2013 DB was granted access to the tunnel. In June 2014 the plans were shelved, because there are special safety rules that requires custom-made trains. DB calls them Class 407. Service locomotives. Diesel locomotives for rescue and shunting work are Eurotunnel Class 0001 and Eurotunnel Class 0031. Operation. The following chart presents the estimated number of passengers and tons of freight, respectively, annually transported through the Channel Tunnel since 1994, in millions. Usage and services. Transport services offered by the tunnel are as follows. Eurotunnel shuttle roll-on roll-off shuttle service for road vehicles and their drivers and passengers. Eurostar passenger trains. Through freight trains. Both the freight and passenger traffic forecasts that led to the construction of the tunnel were overestimated. In particular, Eurotunnel's commissioned forecasts were over predictions. Although the captured share of channel crossings was forecast correctly, high competition, especially from budget airlines which expanded rapidly in the 1990s and 2000s, and reduced tariffs led to low revenue. Overall cross-channel traffic was overestimated. With the EU's liberalization of international rail services, the tunnel and High-Speed 1 have been open to competition since 2010. There have been a number of operators interested in running trains through the tunnel and along High-Speed 1 to London. In June 2013, after several years, DB obtained a license to operate Frankfurt-London trains, not expected to run before 2016 because of delivery delays of the custom-made trains. Passenger traffic volumes. Cross-tunnel passenger traffic volumes peaked at 18.4 million in 1998, dropped to 14.9 million in 2003, then rose to 21.0 million in 2014. At the time of the decision about building the tunnel, 15.9 million passengers were predicted for Eurostar trains in the opening year. In 1995, the first full year, actual numbers were a little over 2.9 million, growing to 7.1 million in 2000, then dropping to 6.3 million in 2003. Eurostar was initially limited by the lack of a high-speed connection on the British side. After the completion of High-Speed 1 in 2 stages in 2003 and 2007, traffic increased. In 2008, Eurostar carried 9,113,371 passengers, a 10% increase over the previous year, despite traffic limitations due to the 2008 Channel Tunnel fire. Eurostar passenger numbers continue to increase, reaching 10,397,894 in 2014. Freight traffic volumes. Freight volumes have been erratic, with a major decrease during 1997 due to a closure caused by a fire in a freight shuttle. Freight crossings increased over the period, indicating the substitutability of the tunnel by sea crossings. The tunnel has achieved a market share close to or above Eurotunnel's 1980s predictions, but Eurotunnel's 1990 and 1994 predictions were overestimates. For through freight trains, the first-year prediction was 7.2 million gross tons, the actual 1995 figure was 1.3 m gross tons. Through freight volumes peaked in 1998 at 3.1 m tons. This fell back to 1.21 m tons in 2007, increasing slightly to 1.24 m tons in 2008. Together with that carried on freight shuttles, freight growth has occurred since opening, with 6.4 m tons carried in 1995, 18.4 m tons recorded in 2003 and 19.6 m tons in 2007. Numbers fell back in the wake of the 2008 fire. Eurotunnel's freight subsidiary is Europort 2. In September 2006, CWS, the UK's largest rail freight operator, announced that owing to cessation of UK-French government subsidies of £52 million per annum to cover the tunnel minimum user charge, a subsidy of around £13,000 per train, at a traffic level of 4,000 trains per annum, freight trains would stop running after 30th of November. Economic performance. Shares in Eurotunnel were issued at £3.50 per share on December 9, 1987. By mid-1989 the price had risen to £11. Delays and cost overruns led to the price dropping. During demonstration runs in October 1994 it reached an all-time low. Eurotunnel suspended payment on its debt in September 1995 to avoid bankruptcy. In December 1997 the British and French governments extended Eurotunnel's operating concession by 34 years, to 2086. Financial restructuring of Eurotunnel occurred in mid-1998, reducing debt and financial charges. Despite the restructuring, The Economist reported in 1998 that to break even Eurotunnel would have to increase fares, traffic and market share for sustainability. A cost-benefit analysis of the tunnel indicated that there were few impacts on the wider economy and few developments associated with the project, and that the British economy would have been better off if it had not been constructed. Under the terms of the concession, Eurotunnel was obliged to investigate a cross-channel road tunnel. In December 1999 road and rail tunnel proposals were presented to the British and French governments, but it was stressed that there was not enough demand for a second tunnel. A three-way treaty between the United Kingdom, France and Belgium governs border controls, with the establishment of control zones wherein the officers of the other nation may exercise limited customs and law enforcement powers. For most purposes these are at either end of the tunnel, with the French border controls on the UK side of the tunnel and vice versa. For some city-to-city trains, the train is a control zone. A binational emergency plan coordinates UK and French emergency activities. In 1999 Eurostar posted its first net profit, having made a loss of £925 million in 1995. In 2005 Eurotunnel was described as being in a serious situation. In 2013, operating profits rose 4% from 2012, to £54 million. Security. There is a need for full passport controls, since this is the border between the Schengen area and the common travel area. There are juxtaposed controls, meaning that passports are checked before boarding first by officials belonging to departing country and then officials of the destination country. These are placed only at the main Eurostar stations. French officials operate at London St Pancras, Ebbsfleet International, and Ashford International, while British officials operate at Calais Fréthun, Lille Europe, Brussels South and Paris Gare du Nord. There are security checks before boarding as well. For the shuttle road vehicle trains, there are juxtaposed passport controls before boarding the trains. For Eurostar trains traveling from places south of Paris, there is no passport and security check before departure, and those trains must stop in Lille at least 30 minutes to allow all passengers to be checked. No checks are done on board. There have been plans for services from Amsterdam, Frankfurt and Cologne to London, but a major reason to cancel them was the need for a stop in Lille. The reason for juxtaposed controls is a wish to prevent illegal immigration before reaching British soil, and because a check of all passengers on a train can take 30 minutes, which creates long queues if done at arrival. No-deal Brexit plan. Under a planned legislation which was published on February 12, 2019, it will give the UK and France time to renegotiate the terms under which the railway service operates. Trains will be permitted to use the Channel Tunnel for 3 months if the UK leaves the EU without a deal, under a proposed European Commission law. Terminals. The terminal's sites are at Triton, near Folkestone in the United Kingdom, and Coquelles, near Calais in France. The terminals are designed to transfer vehicles from the motorway onto trains at a rate of 700 cars and 113 heavy vehicles per hour. The UK site uses the M20 motorway for access. The terminals are organized with the frontier controls juxtaposed with the entry to the system to allow travelers to go onto the motorway at the destination country immediately after leaving the shuttle. The area of the UK site was severely constrained and the design was challenging. The French layout was achieved more easily. To achieve design output, the shuttles accept cars on double-deck wagons. For flexibility, ramps were placed inside the shuttles to provide access to the top decks. At Folkestone there are 20 kilometers, 12 miles, of mainline track, 45 turnouts and 8 platforms. At Calais there are 30 kilometers, 19 miles, of track and 44 turnouts. At the terminals the shuttle trains traverse a figure 8 to reduce uneven wear on the wheels. There is a freight marshalling yard west of Triton at Dollensmore Freight Yard. Regional impact. A 1996 report from the European Commission predicted that Kent and Nord-Pas-de-Calais had to face increased traffic volumes due to general growth of cross-channel traffic and traffic attracted by the tunnel. In Kent, a high-speed rail line to London would transfer traffic from road to rail. Kent's regional development would benefit from the tunnel, but being so close to London restricts the benefits. Gains are in the traditional industries and are largely dependent on the development of Ashford International Passenger Station, without which Kent would be totally dependent on London's expansion. Nord-Pas-de-Calais enjoys a strong internal symbolic effect of the tunnel which results in significant gains in manufacturing. The removal of a bottleneck by means like the tunnel does not necessarily induce economic gains in all adjacent regions. The image of a region being connected to the European high-speed transport and active political response are more important for regional economic development. Some small-medium enterprises located in the immediate vicinity of the terminal have used the opportunity to rebrand the profile of their business with positive effect, such as the new inn at Etching Hill, which was able to commercially exploit its unique selling point as being the closest pub to the Channel Tunnel. Tunnel-induced regional development is small compared to general economic growth. The southeast of England is likely to benefit developmentally and socially from faster and cheaper transport to continental Europe, but the benefits are unlikely to be equally distributed throughout the region. The overall environmental impact is almost certainly negative. Since the opening of the tunnel, small positive impacts on the wider economy have been felt, but it is difficult to identify major economic successes directly attributed to the tunnel. The Eurotunnel does operate profitably, offering an alternative transportation mode unaffected by poor weather. High costs of construction did delay profitability, however, and companies involved in the tunnel's construction and operation early in operation relied on government aid to deal with debts amounted. Illegal immigration. Illegal immigrants and would-be asylum seekers have used the tunnel to attempt to enter Britain. By 1997, the problem had attracted international press attention, and by 1999, the French Red Cross opened the first migrant center at Sangatte, using a warehouse once used for tunnel construction. By 2002, it housed up to 1,500 people at a time, most of them trying to get to the UK. In 2001, most came from Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran, but African countries were also represented. Eurotunnel, the company that operates the crossing, said that more than 37,000 migrants were intercepted between January and July 2015. Approximately 3,000 migrants, mainly from Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, and Afghanistan, were living in the temporary camps erected in Calais at the time of an official count in July 2015. An estimated 3,000 to 5,000 migrants were waiting in Calais for a chance to get to England. Britain and France operate a system of juxtaposed controls on immigration and customs, where investigations happen before travel. France is part of the Schengen Agreement, which has largely abolished border checks between member nations, but the United Kingdom is not. Most illegal immigrants and would-be asylum seekers who got into Britain found some way to ride a freight train. Trucks are loaded onto freight trains. In a few instances, groups of migrants were able to stow away in the cargo area of a tanker truck carrying liquid chocolate and managed to survive, though they did not enter the UK in one attempt. Although the facilities were fenced, airtight security was deemed impossible. Migrants would even jump from bridges onto moving trains. In several incidents, people were injured during the crossing, others tampered with railway equipment, causing delays and requiring repairs. Eurotunnel said it was losing £5 million per month because of the problem. In 2001 and 2002, several riots broke out at Sangatte, and groups of migrants, up to 550 in a December 2001 incident, stormed the fences and attempted to enter en masse. Other migrants use the Eurostar passenger train. They arrive as legitimate Eurostar passengers, but without proper entry papers. Diplomatic efforts. Local authorities in both France and the UK called for the closure of the Sangatte migrant camp, and Eurotunnel twice sought an injunction against the centre. The United Kingdom blamed France for allowing Sangatte to open, and France blamed both the UK for its lax asylum rules, and the EU for not having a uniform immigration policy. The cause-célèbre nature of the problem even included journalists detained as they followed migrants onto railway property. In 2002, after the European Commission told France that it was in breach of European Union rules on the free transfer of goods because of the delays and closures as a result of its poor security, a double fence was built at a cost of £5 million, reducing the numbers of migrants detected each week reaching Britain on goods trains from 250 to almost none. Other measures included CCTV cameras and increased police patrols. At the end of 2002, the Sangatte Centre was closed after the UK agreed to absorb some migrants. On 23 and June 30, 2015, striking workers associated with My Ferry Link damaged the sections of track by burning car tires, leading to all trains being cancelled and a backlog of vehicles. Hundreds seeking to reach Britain made use of the situation to attempt to stow away inside and underneath transport trucks destined for the United Kingdom. Extra security measures included a £2 million upgrade of detection technology, £1 million extra for dog searches, and £12 million, over 3 years, towards a joint fund with France for security surrounding the port of Calais. Illegal attempts to cross and deaths. Migrants take great risks to evade security precautions. In 2002, a dozen migrants died in crossing attempts. In the 2 months from June to July 2015, 10 migrants died near the French tunnel terminal, during a period when 1,500 attempts to evade security precautions were being made each day. On July 6, 2015, a migrant died while attempting to climb onto a freight train while trying to reach Britain from the French side of the Channel. The previous month an Eritrean man was killed under similar circumstances. During the night of July 28, 2015, one person, aged 25-30, was found dead after a night in which 1,502,000 migrants had attempted to enter the Eurotunnel terminal. On August 4, 2015, a Sudanese migrant walked